The leaves had just begun to fall in Ashbury, a small Virginia town that seemed forgotten by time. The houses stood shoulder to shoulder, their shutters like tired eyelids, watching the seasons come and go. The Martins lived on the edge of town, in a two-story colonial with peeling white paint, and a backyard that backed up to a dense patch of woods the locals called the Hollow. It was the kind of place that whispered instead of shouted. That afternoon the sky was bruised with purple clouds. 7-year-old Caleb Martin sat cross-legged in the attic, the only room he was technically forbidden to enter. Dust clung to every surface, and broken things from forgotten years were stacked in towers that wobbled slightly when he moved. In his lap sat a toy he'd found moments earlier, half buried beneath a moth-eaten quilt. It was a stuffed bear with button eyes and a wide, fixed grin. A brass tag on its neck read, "Mr. Bixby." "Do you talk?" Caleb whispered, turning the bear in his hands. The bear didn't answer, but Caleb giggled like it had. That's when his sister Emily found him. "You're not supposed to be up here," she said from the doorway, her arms crossed. At 12, Emily had perfected the art of authority, especially when it came to her little brother. Caleb didn't look up. "I found him. He talks." Emily stepped closer, wrinkling her nose at the dusty air. "It's just a toy. Come on, Mum's making dinner." Caleb turned to her then, eyes wide and serious. "Promise you won't tell." "Tell what?" He leaned in, clutching Mr. Bixby tighter. "Just promise." Emily hesitated, caught off guard by the gravity in his voice. "Fine. I promise." Later that night, after mac and cheese and an argument about homework, the house settled into its nightly silence. Emily lay in bed flipping through a magazine by flashlight. The wind brushed the window pane like fingers. From the room across the hall she heard Caleb whispering again. At first she thought he was talking to himself, something he did when he couldn't sleep. Then she heard a second voice, soft, muffled, mechanical. Emily froze. She crept to his door and pushed it open just enough to peek through. Caleb sat on his bed back to her, the bear cradled in his arms. The toy's head tilted slightly, and Caleb nodded as if in agreement. The next morning, Caleb was gone. The police arrived within the hour. Neighbors were questioned. The house was searched, attic to basement. No broken windows, no footprints. The front and back doors had been locked from the inside. The only thing missing was Caleb and the bear. Karen Martin, their mother, sat in the living room with a blanket clutched around her shoulders, eyes empty, coffee untouched. Emily sat beside her, trying not to cry, trying to remember everything, trying to forget that whisper, "Promise you won't tell." For days the town searched. Volunteers combed the woods. Helicopters hovered over the hollow. Dogs sniffed through brush and briar. But Caleb had vanished as if he'd never existed. Emily couldn't speak. Not at the memorial service. Not when reporters came to the house. Not when her mother screamed at detectives until her voice gave out. All she had were those words, those 5 syllables, echoing like a curse. "Promise you won't tell." She didn't tell. 12 years passed. Ashbury changed its face, but not its heart. The Martins' house remained the same, silent, aching. People stopped asking questions. Caleb became a photograph on a dusty mantelpiece, his room untouched, his shoes still by the door. Emily left for college and didn't return. Karen aged twice as fast. But the story didn't end. One autumn evening, as the sky again turned violet and the leaves fell like rust, a dusty box was left on the Martins' porch. No note, no return address, just a soft bear with button eyes and a wide, fixed grin. When Emily returned home that weekend, her mother handed her the box without a word. Inside was Mr. Bixby. Before we go further, before the secrets buried for over a decade come screaming back to light, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because what Mr. Bixby said when Emily pressed his paw again was exactly what her brother whispered 12 years earlier. "Promise you won't tell." The morning Caleb disappeared, the world seemed to slow. The house was unnervingly quiet. Emily remembered calling for him first, her voice loud in the hallway. No reply. She checked the bathroom. Empty. His bed was made, the blankets smooth. That was strange. Caleb never made his bed. Then she noticed the closet door ajar. She opened it slowly, half expecting to find him hiding, giggling. But there was nothing. No shoes, no toys, no signs of life. Just a stillness that pressed on her chest like a weight. Karen searched the backyard. Emily checked the attic. Nothing. No footprints in the dewy grass, no disturbed leaves near the fence. The gate was locked from the inside. Panic set in like a second skin. By mid-morning, police were swarming the house. Officers questioned Karen and Emily separately. They checked every window, every lock, every inch of carpet. Caleb's room was sealed off. They brought in dogs, combed the neighborhood, then the woods. The hollow turned into a maze of boots, barking, and walkie-talkies. Drones buzzed above treetops, searching for heat signatures. They found nothing. The town held its breath. On the third day, a press conference was held outside the police station. The chief stood stiffly behind the podium, reading from a statement. "We have no evidence of foul play at this time. The investigation remains open and active. We ask the public for any information, no matter how small." Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. And behind them, Ashbury stared. Shocked, afraid, already imagining the worst. The only physical thing missing from the house besides Caleb was Mr. Bixby. Emily mentioned it once, quietly, to an officer. "His bear. It's gone too." But the man just nodded sympathetically, as if she'd said something irrelevant. A toy. What did that matter? It mattered to her. Each night, Emily lay awake, eyes fixed on her ceiling, waiting to hear Caleb's voice again. Sometimes she imagined it. Other times, she was certain she heard whispering outside her door. Once, she thought she saw movement in the shadows across the hall. She convinced herself it was grief twisting reality, and kept silent. Karen, however, unraveled. She snapped at officers. She accused neighbors. She wept through interviews and refused to eat. Her hands shook constantly. She started leaving the porch light on all night, whispering prayers to no one. Emily tried to comfort her, but the guilt in her chest made her voice tremble. She knew something. Not everything, but something. She knew Caleb had been afraid. She knew he'd made her promise. She didn't know what he meant, but she hadn't told. And now he was gone. By the second week, the flyers were everywhere. Caleb's face, round, freckled, smiling, looked back from every lamppost, mailbox, and storefront window. "Missing," they read. "Last seen October 14th, wearing red pajamas." His photo began to fade in the sun. Classmates left notes on the porch, stuffed animals piled on the lawn, news vans camped down the block. Psychics called the house with visions. One woman claimed she saw Caleb walking into the woods hand in hand with a tall man made of smoke. Karen screamed at her over the phone. Emily just listened. School resumed. The neighbors stopped making eye contact. People in grocery stores whispered behind shelves. Emily could hear them. "That's the sister. The one who was home. Do you think she knows more than she's saying?" The worst was the day Karen was brought in for questioning again. A social worker had flagged her for erratic behavior. There were whispers of neglect. Emily waited outside the station, hands clenched, refusing to cry. They let Karen go. No charges, no proof. But the damage was done. The Martins became ghosts in their own town. Over time, search efforts slowed. Interest faded. Reporters moved on. The flyers peeled in the rain. New headlines replaced Caleb's name. Emily watched as hope hardened into silence. She started writing everything down. Every memory, every detail, every word Caleb had said that week. She filled notebooks with them, but she never wrote the promise. She couldn't. Karen stopped speaking for days at a time. Her eyes lost focus, like she was always looking at something behind you. She stopped cooking, stopped cleaning. Sometimes she stood at the edge of the woods, staring into the trees, lips moving without sound. One night, Emily found her in Caleb's room, rocking back and forth on the edge of the bed, clutching a shirt that no longer smelled like him. She didn't even look up. That was the night Emily knew the case would go cold. And it did. They called it unresolved. Not closed, not solved. Just left open, like a door to a room no one wants to enter. But Emily never forgot. Not the whisper, not the promise, not the way the bear had grinned. And though the world had moved on, something in the house hadn't. Something was still waiting. 12 years after Caleb disappeared, Emily Martin stepped off the bus and into a familiar chill that bit through her coat. Ashbury hadn't changed. The trees still leaned over narrow sidewalks like they were listening. The same crooked mailbox marked the end of the Martins' driveway. The same cracked step waited at the porch. Everything stood still, like it had been holding its breath since the day Caleb vanished. She hadn't wanted to return, but her mother was sick. The calls had come less frequently over the years until finally they were just voicemails, then silence. A neighbor reached out to say Karen wasn't doing well. Emily packed a bag and came back, unsure what she'd find. Karen met her at the door, thinner than Emily remembered, with a distant look in her eyes. She offered a frail smile that didn't touch her face. "Emily," she said softly, "you came." The house smelled like dust and lavender. Time had pressed itself into every corner. The photos were still there, Caleb's school portrait, family vacations, birthdays, but they looked more like artifacts than memories. "Everything's the same," Emily murmured, walking through the hall. "I didn't want to change it," Karen said. "In case he comes home." Emily didn't answer. Her stomach twisted. Upstairs, Caleb's room was untouched. His bed still made. Books still lined up on the shelf. On the dresser, his favorite toy cars waited in a row. It was as if time had frozen inside those four walls. That night, Emily lay in her old room, unable to sleep. The wind tapped against the window, just like it used to. The house creaked and groaned, as if remembering her. Somewhere down the hall, something fell with a soft thud. She sat up, listening. Silence. She told herself it was nothing. A box shifting, a draft, the house settling. In the morning, she found it sitting on her bed. Mr. Bixby. Her breath caught. She hadn't brought the bear in. Karen couldn't have either. She'd been asleep. And besides, Emily had left her door locked. She picked up the bear slowly. The button eyes, the grin, the brass tag around its neck. It was unmistakably him. She turned it over in her hands. It looked older, dirtier, like it had been buried and unearthed. "Where did this come from?" she asked her mother at breakfast. Karen didn't look up. "I thought you brought it." "No, I found it on my bed." Karen's spoon paused in her cereal. Then she stood and walked out of the kitchen without a word. Emily sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where her mother had been. Later, alone in her room, Emily pressed the small paw button sewn into the bear's left hand. The voice box inside crackled, then it spoke. "Promise you won't tell." Her hand flew to her mouth. It was the exact same tone, the same pause between words, the same voice, Caleb's voice, recorded, mechanical but real. She dropped the bear. It thudded against the floor and rolled onto its side, still smiling. No one else could have recorded that. It had to be the same toy. But that was impossible. Mr. Bixby had disappeared the same night Caleb had. It wasn't found in the woods. It wasn't turned in by anyone. There was no logical explanation for how it ended up back here on her bed 12 years later. And why now? She picked it up again and searched for hidden seams, compartments, something to explain what she'd heard. Nothing. The voice box was old and half rusted. It shouldn't even work. And yet, it spoke again when she pressed it. "Promise you won't tell." Emily sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the bear in her lap. Something wasn't right. She started noticing small things throughout the house. Picture frames slightly tilted, lights flickering even with new bulbs. Her phone losing charge without explanation. At night she heard faint thumps from the attic. Once she thought she heard a child humming. Karen dismissed it all. "Old house noises," she said, "memories playing tricks." But Emily felt it in her bones. This wasn't grief. This wasn't imagination. This was something else. And it all started the moment Mr. Bixby returned. The bear sat on her dresser now. its glassy eyes following her no matter where she moved. She tried locking it in a drawer, but somehow it would reappear the next day, in her chair, on her pillow, even once on the kitchen table. Karen claimed she never touched it. Emily didn't believe her. One evening, as the wind howled through the trees and rain hammered the windows, Emily pressed the bear's paw again. No sound. She tried again. Crackle. Pause. Then, "Help me." Her heart stopped. It wasn't the same recording, and it wasn't Caleb's voice. Emily couldn't sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, the voice echoed back, those two words in that strange, distorted tone, "Help me." It wasn't Caleb. It wasn't the original recording, but it came from Mr. Bixby. That much she was sure of. The next morning she searched the bear again, this time with tools. She opened a seam at the back and carefully peeled back the fabric. Inside was the old voice box, rusted but intact. There was no place for new recordings, no wiring that would explain multiple voices. It wasn't possible. But it had happened. She turned to the attic. The same dusty air, the same uneven floorboards. She hadn't been up there in years. The insulation hung in tatters. Boxes were stacked where they'd always been, still marked with her father's handwriting. She found the spot where Caleb had discovered Mr. Bixby and sat there. She tried to remember that day, the way Caleb had whispered, the weight of his gaze when he made her promise. She remembered thinking he'd been unusually serious, scared even. But she hadn't asked why. Now she wished she had. Digging through old boxes, she found a folder marked Emily Counseling. Inside were reports from a child psychologist she'd barely remembered seeing. Notes about grief, loss and trauma. Then one entry stood out. Patient's younger brother reports talking to a stuffed animal in private. Describes voice as a cold whisper that tells him secrets. Patient dismisses it as imagination. Emily's hands trembled. She didn't remember Caleb ever talking about the bear during those sessions, but clearly he had, and no one had taken it seriously. She searched further. In the back of the attic, behind old furniture, she discovered a small crawl space. Dust billowed out when she pulled the panel aside. Inside was a shoebox filled with Caleb's drawings. They weren't the crayon scribbles of a normal child. They were dark. One showed a tall, faceless figure hovering over a child in bed. Another depicted a forest with dozens of eyes in the trees. In one, Caleb had drawn himself and Mr. Bixby sitting together, but the bear had fangs and long claws instead of paws. At the bottom of the box was a final drawing, a black mass like smoke with hands whispering into Caleb's ear. Above it, in shaky handwriting, he had written, "The Cold Whisper Man." Emily stared at the words, feeling her stomach drop. She took the drawings to Karen. At first her mother said nothing. Then she looked up slowly, her voice dry. "I remember that name." "You do?" Emily asked. Karen nodded. "He used to wake up screaming about it. Said the Cold Whisper Man was living in the bear, that it followed him. I thought it was just nightmares." "You never told me," Emily whispered. Karen's eyes glazed. "There were a lot of things I didn't say." "I thought protecting you meant keeping things quiet." Emily clutched the drawings. What if he was telling the truth? What if something really was speaking to him? Karen didn't respond. Instead, she stood and walked to the window, staring out toward the woods. Emily left her there and returned to her room. She opened her laptop and searched for any references to the Cold Whisper Man. At first, nothing came up. Then, buried in a local folklore blog, she found a brief mention. Appalachian legend of the Whisper Man, a spirit said to feed on children's secrets, appears through objects they trust, often linked to missing persons cases in the 1800s, disguises itself in toys or stuffed animals, disbelieved, dismissed, forgotten. Emily's skin crawled. It couldn't be real. But then, what else explained the drawings, the voices, the return of the bear? She printed the entry and highlighted every reference. There were a few vague mentions of similar cases across counties, a child gone missing after talking to a doll, a stuffed rabbit found in a locked room, a note left behind with the words, "Don't tell him anything." She created a board above her desk and started pinning up everything, Caleb's drawings, the folklore, the psychologist's notes. She drew lines, made lists. Somewhere in all of this, the truth was buried, and she was going to dig it out. She started keeping the bear in plain sight, watching it. Sometimes at night she swore its head turned ever so slightly toward her. Once she woke up with it lying beside her pillow, though she'd left it on the shelf. She didn't tell Karen, not yet. That night, when the wind howled again and branches scraped the house like claws, Emily pressed the paw one last time. A pause. Then, "Don't look upstairs." Emily stood at the edge of the attic, staring into the darkness beyond the crawl space. "Don't look upstairs," the bear had said. But she was already there. She stepped back and shut the panel, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Her breath fogged in the cold air, even though the heater was on. She brought the drawings back downstairs and spread them on the dining table. Karen watched from across the room, her hands trembling around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "He said the Whisper Man lived in the toy," Emily said quietly. "But maybe he meant more than that." Karen didn't respond. Emily pointed to the black smoke figure in the drawing. "You said he screamed about this. Why didn't you tell the police?" "They wouldn't have believed it," Karen whispered. "I barely did. But he was trying to warn us." Karen's eyes were glassy. "I thought it would stop if we ignored it." Emily shook her head. It didn't. She returned to her laptop that night, digging deeper. She cross-referenced disappearances in nearby towns, stories of missing children, unexplained phenomena. The name Whisper Man appeared in obscure threads, hidden archives, folk tales passed between Appalachian families. One old post caught her attention. "My cousin went missing in 1996. Said a toy talked to him for weeks. Last thing he told me was, 'Don't ever tell him your secrets.' His bear was found in the woods, still talking." Emily clicked through the author's profile. They hadn't posted in over a decade. She printed the thread and pinned it to her board. Each story was slightly different, but the pattern was the same. A child speaks to a toy, tells it something private, then disappears. Sometimes the toy reappears, sometimes not. But the phrase, "promise you won't tell," or some version of it, recurs, again and again. She reached out to a local historian listed on the folklore blog, a man named Harris Langley. He agreed to meet at a nearby library. Langley was older, with deep lines around his eyes and a cane that clicked on the linoleum floor. When Emily showed him Caleb's drawing and the reference to the cold Whisper Man, his face paled. "I've heard the name," he said, lowering his voice. "Most think it's just old mountain superstition, but there's more." He pulled out a folder and flipped through yellowed newspaper clippings. Late 1800s, children went missing across 3 counties. No evidence of abduction. Houses locked, parents asleep. Some of the kids were found days later, wandering the woods. But they were different. "Different how?" Emily asked. "They didn't speak, wouldn't eat. Some didn't recognize their families. They all had the same mark, right behind the ear. A small black bruise like a thumbprint." Emily's hands trembled, like someone touched them there. Langley nodded. "One boy spoke once, just once. Said a voice lived in his doll, told him secrets he wasn't supposed to know, told him stories about other children. Where's that boy now? Died 2 weeks later. They said he fell down the stairs. But some folks thought he jumped." Emily closed the folder. "Did any of them mention the Whisper Man directly?" Langley took a deep breath. "Only in whispers. They called him the listener in the dark. Said he fed on secrets. The more personal, the more power he gained. He'd trade safety for silence." Emily stared out the library window, her mind racing. "Caleb told me something. Right before he vanished, he said, 'Promise you won't tell.'" Langley's gaze sharpened. "Then you were his witness. What does that mean?" Langley hesitated. "If the Whisper Man marked your brother, and your brother trusted you with a secret, then he may not have taken Caleb completely. He might have bartered, left something unfinished." Emily's throat tightened. "Is there a way to stop it?" The old man looked tired. "There's an old belief, if the secret is told, truly told, sometimes the bond breaks. But it has to be a confession. The truth must cost something. She left the library with more questions than answers. That night, the bear sat in the hallway outside her door. Karen insisted she hadn't moved it. Emily sat on the floor, eye to eye with it. "What do you want?" she whispered. No response. She pressed the paw. Crackle. Pause. Then Caleb's voice again. "I miss you." Tears blurred her vision. She held the bear close and whispered back, "I miss you too." Then it spoke again, softer this time. "He's coming." Emily woke to scratching. Faint at first, barely audible. Then again, more deliberate, like fingernails raking slowly across wood. She sat up, heart pounding. The sound was coming from Caleb's room. She crept down the hall, the floorboards creaking beneath her. The door was open, the bed untouched. The scratching had stopped. She stepped inside, shivering as a cold draft brushed her neck. Then she heard it again, beneath the floor. She dropped to her knees, ear pressed against the wood. There, faint but real, came another scrape. Something was moving down there. Emily ran to the garage, grabbed a crowbar, and returned before doubt could settle in. She worked fast, prying up the boards near the sound. The wood groaned, nails shrieked, and finally a loose plank gave way. Beneath it was dirt. Then more boards, different, older. She pulled those up too, revealing a narrow shaft barely wide enough for a person. The smell hit her next, earthy, damp, and something else, something stale, like rot and rusted metal. With her phone flashlight, she leaned in and looked down. A tunnel. It extended deep under the house, its walls reinforced with old wood beams. She hesitated only a moment before lowering herself in. The air was thick and cold. The tunnel stretched far, curving slightly as it went. Emily moved slowly, her knees brushing against broken toys, shoes, and tattered scraps of fabric. She recognized one of Caleb's missing sneakers. Deeper still, she found a small music box, its ballerina snapped in half, still turning soundlessly. Her breath caught. Then she found the photos. Pinned to the walls with nails and rusted wire were faded Polaroids of children. Some smiled, some cried, each was dated. The oldest read 1892, the most recent October 14th, 2010. Caleb's. Next to his photo, carved into the wood, was a phrase, "He told her." She promised. Emily's legs trembled. She pressed forward, flashlight flickering. Further down, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The ceiling curved like a dome, roots twisting through the earth above. In the center sat a pile of discarded toys, stuffed animals, dolls, action figures, all positioned in a crude circle. At the center, untouched, lay Mr. Bixby. Emily reached for him. Suddenly, the flashlight died. Darkness swallowed everything. She froze, panic surging. Her breathing echoed too loudly. Then behind her, a whisper. "Emily!" She turned, heart racing. Nothing, just the dark. Then again closer. "Emily!" It wasn't Caleb. The voice was older, deeper. Wrong. She backed up until her foot struck something soft. She pointed the dead flashlight instinctively, as if it still offered protection. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, shapeless, as if made from smoke and silence. No eyes, just a mouth. Not drawn or carved, but formed from shifting shadows that moved with intent. She couldn't scream. The figure knelt slowly, extending a hand of swirling black mist toward the bear. And then it spoke, not aloud, but inside her. "You promised." Emily stumbled back, tripping over the toys. The whisper was inside her skull, vibrating in her teeth. "Tell the secret and take him back. Or stay silent and be mine." She shook her head, tears streaming. "I don't know the secret. You do." The toys began to shift. Their eyes turned toward her. The air thickened, pressing against her chest like a weight. Then a new sound, above her, from the opening in the floor. "Emily!" Karen's voice, distant, faint, real. The figure hissed, low and sharp. Emily grabbed Mr. Bixby and turned to flee. The tunnel pulsed around her, whispers growing louder, faster, endless. She crawled, her knees scraping stone and splinters. She didn't look back. When she reached the shaft, Karen's hand reached down. Emily shoved the bear up first, then scrambled after it. As she emerged into the room, the board slammed shut behind her. No wind, no sound, just silence. Karen helped her to her feet, eyes wide. "What's down there?" Emily clutched the bear. "A place where secrets live." Karen looked pale. "I saw you talking to it once. The bear. When you were little. I thought it was just pretend." Emily stared at her. "What did I say?" "You said, 'He's listening.' And then you looked at me and said, 'Don't let him take me too.'" Emily's voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me?" Karen's lips trembled. "I was afraid." The house groaned beneath them. Mr. Bixby's eyes glinted in the dim light, and from the silence came one more whisper. "Still listening." The house didn't sleep after that night. Karen insisted on sealing the floor, nailing the boards shut, even placing a heavy dresser over them. But Emily knew it wasn't enough. The tunnel was only a passage. The real breach was deeper, older. It didn't live in the earth. It lived in silence, in the promise she'd kept buried. Mr. Bixby sat on her desk again. She hadn't moved him. That afternoon, Emily tested the bear once more, pressing the paw gently. The voice that came out chilled her blood. "Don't lie to me." It wasn't Caleb, it wasn't even human. She stared at the bear, heart pounding. The voice was guttural, coiled like smoke in her ear. She pressed the paw again. Nothing. Again. Silence. Then finally, "I'm still him, aren't I?" Emily dropped the toy. It landed upright, staring. She couldn't stay in the house. She needed answers, more than whispers and half-truths. That evening she returned to the library, searching archives with shaking hands. She found a box of microfilm from the early 1900s. In one article, a headline caught her eye. 3 children found alive in hollow after week. Claim Whisper Man gave them food. The article was brief. Local children had vanished during a storm, then reappeared with no explanation. They were silent, distant. One had scrawled the words he said not to tell in charcoal across a barn wall before disappearing again a month later. Emily leaned back, rubbing her temples. It wasn't just a story, it was a pattern, a predator that hunted in silence, through fear, through secrecy. The next morning she woke to the sound of humming, a soft, childlike tune. She followed it down the hallway past Caleb's room to the attic stairs. The door was open. Each step creaked under her feet. Dust danced in shafts of grey light, and there, sitting cross-legged in the middle of the attic, was a boy, 7 years old, red pajamas, freckles, Caleb. He didn't look up. Emily's breath caught. "Caleb." He turned slowly. His eyes were blank. Not vacant, but too still, like glass, like they'd been painted on. His smile was wrong, too wide, familiar. He stood and walked toward her without blinking. "Emily," he said, voice soft. She stepped back. "Is it really you? I missed you." She reached out slowly. Her fingers brushed his sleeve, real, warm, but then he blinked and vanished. No sound, no warning, just gone. Emily stumbled back, clutching her chest. The attic was empty. Mr. Bixby sat in the corner facing her. She ran downstairs, trembling. Karen found her curled on the couch. "I saw him," Emily whispered. "I touched him. He was real. But then, he disappeared." Karen nodded slowly. "Sometimes I hear him too." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want you to think I was losing it," she said. "But some nights, I wake up and he's there in the hallway, in the kitchen, always in red, always watching." Emily held her head. "It's not just grief. He's trapped, somewhere close." Karen's voice cracked. "Then bring him back." That night, Emily stared at the board on her wall, at the web of names, drawings, headlines. She traced her finger along Caleb's picture. What if his body had been taken, but not his soul? What if part of him had remained in the promise? She pressed the bear's paw again. Silence. Then, in her own voice, "Don't tell Mom." Emily gasped. That was her. She'd said that once, long ago. It wasn't recorded, no one else had heard it. Yet here it was, played back through the bear's mouth. She pressed it again. More voices, snippets of childhood. Arguments, fears, secrets. The bear wasn't just speaking, it was remembering, stealing. Emily ripped it open again, pulling wires, tearing, stuffing. Inside she found something new, a scrap of paper, folded tight. She opened it with trembling hands. I saw him take Caleb. He came from the wall. He told me not to scream, I didn't. No signature, but the handwriting was her own. A memory she'd locked away, a secret too heavy to hold at 7. It had returned. Emily sat back, breath shallow. She had seen it. She hadn't told. And now, the thing that took Caleb, knew she remembered. The wind howled outside, the lights flickered, and somewhere in the house a door creaked open. Emily stood in the hallway, fists clenched, the note still in her hand. The memory it unlocked wasn't vague. It was vivid, instant, merciless. She had seen the figure, tall, grey, shapeless, emerge from Caleb's wall 12 years ago. She had watched in frozen terror as it bent over his bed, whispered something into his ear, and gently took him by the hand. And Caleb had turned to her as he was led away. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't cried. Just whispered, "Promise you won't tell." And she hadn't. Until now. The next night, the bear sat again on her desk, as if waiting. The house was silent. Karen slept downstairs, medicated and exhausted. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, the note open beside her, Mr. Bixby in her lap. "I remember," she whispered. The bear's eyes seemed to shimmer. "I remember everything." The light bulb above her flickered, then went out. Emily stood holding the bear tight and walked slowly toward Caleb's room. The boards were still nailed down, the dresser heavy, but she knew the path now. She removed the dresser, pried the wood loose, and descended. The tunnel welcomed her. The air was colder than before, the path darker. The toys she'd passed before had moved, arranged now in rows along the walls, watching her. She moved through them, heart hammering. In the chamber, the circle of toys waited. The central space was clear, but not empty. The Whisper Man stood at the center, not as smoke now, but formed, tall, gaunt, more shadow than shape. His face was a blur of shifting dark, but she could feel his gaze. His presence was suffocating, like gravity had thickened around him. "You came," he said. The voice was no longer just in her head. It echoed through the chamber, crawling into her bones. Emily didn't speak. He stepped aside, and there, standing where he'd once vanished, was Caleb, still 7, still wearing red, still silent. Emily ran to him, dropped to her knees, wrapped her arms around him. He didn't hug her back. "You can take him," the Whisper Man said, "but the silence must be paid." Emily looked up. "What does that mean?" "A secret for a secret. You've carried his, now give yours." Emily's throat tightened. "I already did." "No," the Whisper Man replied. "You revealed a memory, not a truth. You want him back? Then tell the truth that cost you." Emily held Caleb's hand. "He trusted me. And you let him go." Tears stung her eyes. "I was afraid." The Whisper Man leaned closer. "Say it." Emily turned to Caleb. "The night you disappeared, I saw him. I saw what took you. I could have screamed. I could have run to Mom, but I didn't. I shut the door and climbed into bed and told myself it wasn't real." The chamber grew darker. Emily's voice cracked. "I didn't tell anyone because I thought it would make it go away, because I didn't want to be the girl who saw monsters, because I was afraid no one would believe me, and because deep down, I thought if I never said it out loud, it wouldn't be true." The Whisper Man was silent. "I betrayed you, Caleb," Emily said, trembling. "I didn't keep you safe." The shadows pulsed. The toys fell silent. The ground rumbled softly. Caleb blinked. His fingers tightened around hers. The Whisper Man reeled back. A wind surged through the chamber, tearing through the roots above, scattering dust and scraps of paper. The shadows hissed, pulling inward, unraveling like thread. The Whisper Man screamed, a sound like cracking ice and burning metal, and vanished. Caleb looked up at her, eyes wide. Still wordless but awake, Emily scooped him up, pressing her forehead to his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. From above, the tunnel began to collapse. Emily grabbed Mr. Bixby with her free hand and ran. Toys tumbled, the walls groaned, whispers snapped through the air like branches in a storm. She pushed Caleb ahead, lifting him through the opening. Boards splintered, dirt rained down. She climbed out just as the tunnel caved in, swallowing itself in a thunderous hush. Silence returned. Karen stood at the door, hands over her mouth. Caleb stood next to her now, blinking, breathing. Real. Emily dropped the bear on the floor. Its mouth twitched one last time. "You told." Then it went still. The house felt different after the collapse. The air was lighter, like something ancient had finally exhaled. Dust clung to the corners of the hallway, but the heaviness, the quiet pressure that had weighed on every room, was gone. For the first time in 12 years, it felt like the house belonged to the living again. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, small hands wrapped around a mug of warm milk. He hadn't said a word since they pulled him from the tunnel. He hadn't cried either, just watched, observed, as if the world was something entirely new. Karen hovered nearby, silent but attentive. Her eyes never left him. Emily stood by the sink, still gripping the shattered remains of Mr. Bixby. "I don't understand how he's here," Karen said at last, voice quiet. Emily didn't either. Caleb hadn't aged. His face, his height, even the pajamas, exactly as they were the night he vanished. Yet his eyes told a different story. They were old, not broken, but weathered, like they'd seen more years than his body would ever show. They took him to the hospital the next morning. Doctors ran tests, took scans, checked reflexes. Everything came back normal, perfect in fact. No malnutrition. No trauma, no developmental delay. "But he should be 19, one nurse said, frowning at the chart. "He's 7, Karen whispered. "He never stopped being 7. When questioned by social workers, Caleb remained silent. He made no gestures, no drawings, no signs of distress. Just calm, eerie calm. One evaluator described him as a child stuck in a memory that's not his own. After a few days, they were allowed to bring him home. The authorities opened a new investigation, but had no idea where to begin. No suspects, no leads, no answers. The boy was back. That was all they had. Emily knew better. She kept the remains of Mr. Bixby in a shoebox under her bed, wrapped in cloth. But some nights she heard something faint. Not words, more like movement. A subtle shift of fabric. A sigh from a toy that shouldn't breathe. She tried to ignore it, but Caleb noticed. One night he stood in the hallway outside her door, just watching. Emily stirred, opened her eyes, and there he was, quiet as ever. She sat up. "Do you need something?" He didn't respond. But then he stepped forward, lifted a finger to his lips and mouthed a single word, "Shh." Then he turned and went back to bed. Emily didn't sleep that night. The next morning she found muddy footprints on the floor near the back door, small ones, bare. She followed them into the yard, out past the shed to the edge of the hollow. There, in the soft earth, were more prints. Another set, not hers. Not Karen's, and far too large to belong to Caleb. She stepped closer and saw something nestled at the base of a tree, a toy rabbit, threadbare, missing one eye. She didn't touch it. Inside the house, Caleb sat on the living room floor, staring out the window. When she came in, he looked at her with calm, unreadable eyes. "Did you go outside?" she asked. He said nothing. But she saw a smear of dirt on his heel. She dropped to her knees in front of him. "Caleb, you're safe now. You don't have to be afraid." Still, he was silent. She took his hand gently. "If he's still out there, we won't let him come back. I promise." His eyes flicked toward the hallway, toward the room where the shoebox was kept. Emily followed his gaze. Later that night, she took the box into the backyard. She dug a hole deep, far beyond the roots, and placed the remnants of Mr. Bixby inside. She poured lighter fluid, struck a match. The flames rose fast. The bear twisted as it burned, stuffing curling like ash, brass tag darkening to black. No screams, no words, just fire. But when the last flame died, she felt it. Something let go. Inside, Karen stood with Caleb by the window. "Will it come back?" her mother asked. "I don't think so," Emily replied, "but something else might." Karen nodded. "Then we'll be ready." And from the forest, the wind carried something soft, like a whisper that had finally run out of breath. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't settle but lingers, like a question left unanswered. Caleb never spoke, not once. But he began to move with more intention. He helped Karen in the garden. He followed Emily through the house. He would sit in the living room for hours, watching the fire crackle or stand in the hallway, listening to the ticking of the old clock. The doctors called it selective mutism brought on by trauma, but Emily wasn't convinced. Sometimes she saw him staring at the corners of rooms as if expecting them to open. Other times he would flinch at shadows, as though they still whispered things she couldn't hear. He never touched another toy. Emily respected that. The shoebox was gone. The bear was gone. But part of him, whatever he was, remained like a stain in the seams of the house. You couldn't see it. You just knew it hadn't truly left. The questions never stopped. Reporters came. Police reopened the case. Scientists speculated about time anomalies, fugue states, genetic stasis. None of them had answers. The only consistent fact was this: Caleb had vanished at 7 years old and returned 12 years later, unchanged, alive, intact, but not whole and not explainable. Karen refused interviews. Emily turned down every offer. They kept to themselves. The house remained locked. The hollow stayed untouched until one afternoon, a month later. Emily heard laughter from the woods. It wasn't Caleb's. She followed the sound carefully, stopping just before the tree line. There in the distance she saw a child running between trees. A girl, maybe 5 or 6, alone, laughing, chasing something. Then she stopped. Beneath her feet was a small stuffed lamb. Its eyes were glass, its mouth was sewn in a crooked smile. And as the wind passed, Emily could swear it moved just enough to whisper, "Tell me a secret." She backed away slowly. Back at the house, Caleb waited at the window, watching. That night, Emily wrote everything down. Every word, every memory, every whisper. She filled a journal, sealed it, and locked it away in a box of her own. Not because she wanted to forget, but because one day someone else might need to remember. At bedtime, Caleb walked over and sat beside her. He reached out and, for the first time, wrapped his arms around her. Just once, then let go. Still silent. But somehow, more present than he had ever been. Emily looked at him. "You're home now," she said. He nodded. She kissed his forehead. "We're safe." But neither of them slept that night. They just listened, to the silence, to the quiet, to the new kind of peace that came not from absence, but from the weight of a truth finally spoken. And somewhere beyond the hills, where the trees grew thick and the stars whispered to the ground, a new secret waited. Another child, another toy, another promise. And the cycle would begin again. Unless someone broke it, for good. If you've stayed with us through this entire chilling journey, thank you. Stories like this one linger not just because of what's said, but because of what's left unsaid. So if you want more unforgettable mysteries like Caleb's, be sure to subscribe right now. We dive deep into the strange, the eerie, and the stories you won't hear anywhere else. And don't go just yet. Click on the video on screen now to uncover what we found buried beneath that abandoned house. Trust us, you won't believe what was hidden there all these years.